I was actually quite looking forward to the Olympics in Tokyo because I thought that, the conversation about trans women in sport was going to get a bit of a different perspective on it when you see the visuals of active competition. We're not sure if they're going to go ahead. Do you think stuff like that will start to bring it to the fore to people that this is more than just about kind of respecting people's pronouns? There's an actual real life consequence to some of the stuff?
I hope so. When I saw that there were trans athletes that were going to the Olympics, I was upset because, I've taken a lot of heat for this, but I'm not someone who supports trans women in women's sports. I think that almost all of the time it's highly unfair. I think that that's just a very simple biological reality that biological males have just a list of advantages, even if they are on estrogen. However, then I kind of agree with you. I was like, well, maybe it's a good thing because the overwhelming amount of people who argue in defense of trans women in women's sports, they have a completely different picture in their mind. They probably don't even know any trans people. They're just trying to be virtuous. It's an issue that they just want to be nice about, frankly. They don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, so they do support it. However, there are just stunning visuals. I'm sure you guys have seen them. There are just like the best pictures that are almost a parody of like trans track. What's the word? People who play track. I don't know. Competitors.
Athletes. Trans athletes.
Okay, trans athletes, whatever. Clearly I don't know anything about sports. Like just looming over their biological female competitors, like beating them, wiping them the fuck out. And it's like, how can anyone look at those pictures and be like, oh yeah, that's fair? Like it's a joke. So again, that's one of the things I get the most hate for, that I don't support it, but I don't really see why being included in sports is a human right. It's not like you're being denied housing or food or a job. It's sports.
It's a very good point, Blair. Don't you think the problem is that most of the people who watch this will share your point of view, and they will have complete empathy for your position and will want you to live as full a life as possible and for you to be happy as possible. But they don't feel that they can say trans women shouldn't be in female sports, because that's a way to get ruined, cancelled, have your career shut down, etc., etc.
Absolutely. I'm trans and I get attacked for it. So imagine if someone who isn't trans is saying it. You know what I mean? But I do find that most people feel that way. Like, because I've done videos on this topic, I suddenly have people reaching out that I know in real life that aren't political at all, that don't have any, necessarily political persuasion, who are like, I've never been able to say it. I have people who play sports. Like, good example. My mom called me and said that my nephew had 2 trans athletes playing in, I think it was like tennis or something at their high school, and that they're just kind of like demolishing everyone and no one's allowed to talk about it. Like, this is just something that people tend to suspend their knowledge of how the real world works to argue in favor of, which doesn't work.
And you say it doesn't work, but eventually you can suspend your real life knowledge of the world, but eventually the world is going to come and slap you in the face, as I've found many times to my cost.
Right. So that's why
Are you coming out here? Is that what's happening?
No. Not at all.
So that's why I'm actually excited about those athletes going to the Olympics, because I think that when people see that juxtaposition, like Laurel Hubbard, for example, you guys know who that one is? Like, come on. Like, if you want to talk about like track and maybe baseball or something, it's like, okay, let's have the debate. But like weightlifting, something that's completely upper body driven and complete, like, come on. It's so obvious. But, it's one of those things that I think people have to see to have their minds changed about.
Blair, and you alluded to the fact that this issue is political, and the truth is, I guess we probably wouldn't be talking about it if it wasn't a constant thing that was talked about in a political way. Why? Can you explain this to me? Why is this issue political at all?
Well, because I think that transgenderism has become a political issue, which it really shouldn't. I always argue in favor for the fact that it should be treated as a neurological issue completely. but there is this movement to demedicalize what being trans is, to say that you don't need gender dysphoria to be trans, to say that, there are no biological differences between male and female, which is a contradiction for why they keep allowing and pushing for underage children to get surgeries. But, when you remove any meaningful way to diagnose something, all you have left is the politics of it. And that's what's unfortunate, that there are real trans people who have found themselves becoming this political football being thrown back and forth between these two sides that, frankly, both sides always get it wrong. So, maybe it's a pipe dream, maybe it's impossible, but we have to attempt to depoliticize the issue. We have to attempt to regain control of the narrative that it is a medical issue, in my opinion, because that's historically how it was always treated. There was a time before this hyper wokeness that, maybe not everyone really knew what being trans was, but everyone kind of had this underlying knowledge in the back of their head that there are some people that want to be women and some people that want to be men when they are not, and that those people have surgeries and have hormones, and that it's like a medical thing. And frankly, I find that things were much less fiery, heated, and contentious when that was sort of the overall consensus. That it was like, oh yeah, it's a medical thing that some people do. Even if people thought it was weird, they saw it as that. Now it's become this hyper-political issue that is just toxic for everyone.
And it is toxic for everyone. Do you think part of the problem is, and you've alluded to it earlier in the interview, saying that, people want to do the right thing. Do you think people are conflating the gay rights issue in the early 80s and the struggle that gay people had to trans people in 2021, and they just don't want to make the same mistakes, really?
I think that's part of it. I think that there's this need to be on the right side of history, whatever the current right side is perceived to be, or correct side, I should say. And yeah, it's just, we live in an environment where if you are not seen as 1000% accepting, 1000% on board with the current narrative, and in terms of being progressive, you almost can't even live in polite society, even in red states, even in places that maybe there are more conservatives, because these major corporations that employ people, you don't have the freedom to say how you really feel about things. Even if it is something as, I don't think it should be controversial at all to say that sports should be, segregated by biological sex, but it's become something that is.